If I had to distill the themes from the last 3 months worth of daily videos on this channel, I'd say half of them would come down to this. Actions have consequences. With his big dramatic global tariff storm, President Trump went out of his way to grab attention, to extort every country in the rest of the world with big actions. And now, bit by bit, it's time for those consequences to start making themselves felt. The Trump administration has been grappling with some of those consequences today, as they have been locked in talks once again with Xi Jinping's China, having affronted it with a massive tariff assault, which was then negotiated to a dial-down, just a moderate assault. Trump has been learning that whereas he had presumed he had overwhelming leverage over everyone else in the world, actually China has a great deal more he can hit back with than he realised. And we saw that early, of course, with China withholding the rare earth metals, and especially rare earth magnets that it dominates and the United States absolutely needs. That brought the US somewhat humbled to the table and got them to wind down the bulk of the tariffs in return for China, somewhat reopening the flow again. Somewhat. And if Trump starts throwing his weight around, he can expect that that will come straight back into the frame. However, of all of the issues one might think would be the priority for talks right now, and we'll come to a big one of those in just a moment, the focus seems to have been centered largely on the future of current Chinese social media app, TikTok. Congress had passed a law banning TikTok, you will recall, unless the company divested from Chinese control, which at that point it was not willing to do. Then Trump, on somewhat dubious legal grounds, delayed that twice, since he really didn't want to cancel TikTok, given what a brilliant propaganda platform it's been for his campaign. And today it was announced that a framework deal has been agreed on TikTok, details to be confirmed or not, in a call between Trump and Xi Jinping himself to take place on Friday. This came after a day of talks in Madrid, Spain, between the two sides, talks that the US lead negotiator, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, had said that the Chinese had come in with a number of very aggressive asks. And this is a key indicator that China feels it has a lot of leverage of its own on the US right now. Unlike all of the other countries that came to the United States on the principle of, all right, tell us what you want, we'll try to negotiate it down to something we can live with, China is coming in instead and saying, we are the powerful one here, you give us what we want. Whether they're right in that negotiating position or not will likely be reflected in the balance of any deal that finally gets agreed. Today's talks came as another huge consequence of Trump's tariff attack on China is really very strongly coming into view, and that is the impact on American farmers, particularly but not exclusively, soybean farmers. Because normally China buys a lot of American soybeans. It buys a huge quantity on the global market, and that has included buying around 30% of America's total, around 70% of the soybeans produced in certain states, such as North Dakota. And then Trump came along and slapped tariffs onto Chinese goods. China reciprocated. So now China has 34% tariffs on American soybeans. That has had the effect of making the American product more expensive than the alternative major source, which is Brazil. You remember Brazil, which has also been hit by 50% US tariffs because Trump has got a deal about their prosecution of Bolsonaro. Brazil, which is a member of the BRICS grouping, that is one of China's main networks of support. So yes, as a result, China, for the 2025 season, at the time of shooting this video, has bought no American soybeans. It's bought quite a lot of Brazilian soybeans. Here's the chart showing the percentage of US soybeans going to China. The last time there was a drop, you'll notice, was during the first Trump administration, when he first started playing trade war. That had recovered somewhat, but the next bar on the chart, unless something suddenly changes, is going to be zero. And that's hitting American farmers pretty hard, as you can imagine. They might be wondering why that's not been a bigger feature of these talks today, rather than TikTok. Now, okay, Trump did post on social media about it last month, if that counts. He said this: China is worried about its shortage of soybeans. Are they, though? Our great farmers produce the most robust soybeans. Do they, though? I hope China will quickly quadruple its soybean orders. This is also a way of substantially reducing China's trade deficit with the USA. I don't get the impression that China much cares about the trade deficit. In any case, substantially thanks to the zero soybean trade, that trade deficit has soared, not decreased. It's not helping the farmers that thanks to Trump's tariffs, it's costing them more to buy the inputs they need, such as fertilizer and chemicals and equipment. All of those costs are going right up. Right now, the soybean harvest season is just weeks away, and the industry has never reached this point without all of the orders from China being firmly in place. The New York Times quoted farmer and president of the North Dakota Soybean Growers Association, Justin Sherlock, as saying this: "Are we going to lose a generation of farmers because of the trade war? I think that's what we're fast approaching." This after the industry in the US had worked hard over 4 decades to build around China being its largest customer. There are reasons to think China will want to get back to a position where they are buying American beans again, possibly at a reduced level to where it was before. Being heavily dependent on Brazil as a major source of supply leaves them more vulnerable to that one location having a bad harvest year. That could be a problem any time in history, but with the increasing impact of climate change, the chances, of course, are going up, not down. Any smart security of supply strategy would hedge by having contracts with all the most productive areas of the world, not just one of them. But they don't need to do that this year. China's own soybean crop has been good, Brazil's has been good, China's sitting on 2 years' worth of reserves. Now, America's crop has been good as well. It just doesn't have any buyers for it. Doesn't have any Chinese ones anyway. And luckily for China, President Trump doesn't believe in climate change, so maybe it wouldn't even occur to him that China might have some degree of bluffing involved in their current position. In his first term, Trump sent the suffering farmers a slug of money to tide them over. Will he do so again? I mean, he keeps boasting about how much money is being brought in with his tariffs, so you'd think it would be hard for him not to. But it could only be for a short-term relief if he does. And whether he's still got it or not is another question we'll come back to at the end. But even if he does, the bad news isn't wholly over for the farming community, because the other headache they have, thanks to the consequences of Trump's other bold actions, is that they can't get workers to harvest their crops. Now, this isn't restricted to soybean farmers. Between March and July this year, the US agricultural workforce fell by 155,000, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And Pew Research Center said that total immigrant labour in the country fell by 750,000 from January to July. Politico quoted Tim Wood, a dairy farmer from Pennsylvania, who pointed out the obvious. He said this: "People don't understand that if we don't get more labour, our cows don't get milked and our crops don't get picked. That is a problem that does not go away if and when Trump sends them some cash, presumably." Meanwhile, consequences are flowing around the world. So, for example, China's exports to Africa are soaring. Goods that used to go to the United States are now flowing there instead, amongst other places, such as particularly Southeast Asia and Latin America. And why wouldn't African countries want to buy Chinese goods? I mean, for one thing, they're cheap. China has invested a lot in some of their infrastructure via the Belt and Road Initiative. According to China's state-run media, so treat the exact numbers here with caution, China says that it has created more than 1 million jobs in Africa in the last 3 years. Even if that figure's exaggerated, a lot of Africans will believe it, in the same way that some people in Europe inexplicably believe whatever bullshit Elon Musk has lately tweeted. And even if that figure isn't right, there is still a substantial number that is true. Meanwhile, Trump has slapped tariffs on Africa, has cancelled USAID programs that were helping them. Consequences everywhere you look. And he's also been known to describe African countries as, quote, some shithole nobody's ever heard of. As a result, 4 of Africa's biggest smartphone brands are now Chinese, along with a lot of other goods. Now, of course, some African leaders are worried that the trend will undermine their own attempts to stop simply exporting commodities and instead to develop high added value industries of their own, which is a serious thing they should be concerned about. But economist David Omojomolo told Politico they feel they have to stay in China's good books. He said, China is really the only game in town. Now, not all the actions were Trump's in the creation of that trend, but the momentum has certainly accelerated in the last 7 months. One other factor, by the way, that will be adding to the steely glint in the eyes of the Chinese negotiators facing Scott Bessent and his team, that would be Trump's insistence to NATO countries that they must stop buying Russian oil and slap 100% tariffs onto China and India before the United States will agree to do anything likewise. It's pretty obvious, as I discussed here before, that this position is really about giving the other NATO countries a bar too high for them to quickly jump over, even if they were agree to try to do it. So Trump can then blame them for him doing what he really wants to do anyway with regard to Russia, i.e. nothing. But from China's standpoint, he is encouraging important trade partners of China's, particularly the EU, to just cut them off. And that is as hostile a move as actually introducing those tariffs yourself, I mean, you would think. Unsurprisingly, China has hit back at the proposal. But yes, it's building its alternatives in the global south particularly, and doing it quickly. A lot of those new trade relationships will now stay, will grow over the coming years. If Trump's tariffs got turned off tomorrow, still a lot of that damage has already been done and it will stick around. And of course, maybe they will get turned off. I mean, not tomorrow, but the Supreme Court will be taking the challenge to the legality of Trump's tariffs soon after the new session starts, because he brought them in on a legally dubious grounds, of course. If it finds against, Trump would have other vehicles he could eventually use to put equivalents back in place, but he would have to refund about half of the money taken so far for tariffs. And that would be a huge, costly mess. But the refunds wouldn't benefit the farmers, wouldn't repair the damage done with the rest of the world as trading partners. Yes, big actions, big consequences. A lot of those consequences are going to stick around far longer than President Trump himself will. Just ask the farmers that right now are veering towards bankruptcy.